Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the second half of High Rise Invasion. So, this is an anime that was ultimately on Netflix, and so ultimately at the end of the day, I'm going to finish up the rest of the first half. Ultimately, you haven't seen the first half or anything along those lines. You're now going to be utterly confused by the climax at the end of this anime. So, overall, I think it had a very bizarre and or strange beginning. Reasonably, this story kind of jumps off to me as being kind of like another one of those kind of alternate world stories that eventually is supposed to end in death. But in the end, eventually, it seems that we go out of our way to eventually tie way too much into the closer to God aspect, and then it bizarrely comes into people seemingly being granted abilities and stuff like that towards the end here. It kind of just ultimately, I guess, didn't probably under it probably didn't really realize exactly where to exactly end with this, because I think the beginning of it didn't have an exactly solid plan. But recently, I thought there was some interesting ways about this show ending, but when looking at it, I just thought it was really and utterly just bizarre. There was a lot of things going on to where I was like, what even is this show anymore? It doesn't feel like this show feels anywhere close to being trapped in reality anymore. Like, it's just going so far off of a beaten path. Like, it's kind of really uh it really goes full on anime to bizarrish measures if it wasn't bizarre in the very beginning of this. So, going into here, basically there is attacked to seemingly have it to where there is one side against another. Like, it goes from just being an onslaught of having people survive to now there being seemingly a bizarrish, human and mask alliance going on. Which I'm like, okay, so I guess it all has to end that way. But it doesn't really seem like we got a real true consensus of who started all of this, how it all got together or whatever. I think animes or just manga or anything along those lines, they don't have to explain nothing to anybody. They just have to just hey, here's a cool visual, and hey, here's another time where ultimately there's going to be less than nothing of clothes on a person, and isn't that great? I think animes they have to try to do a story, but the story isn't something that has to be explained at the end or ever. Like, it just goes into the fact that it's meh, like we just need to make something look really cool, or just have a story that people want to solve, but it never will be. That's always the anime route of doing things, and ultimately this feels just like another one of those where it doesn't feel like everything is solved at the end. It's just okay, hey, uh, big fight out, isn't that cool? And really, that's all it is. It's a big fight out, and we ultimately get to see some characters and stuff like that. And we ultimately get to see that this is quite possibly going to get a second season. It seems like they've kind of pushed that to there being a second season, because it feels like there is some stuff that is otherwise kind of tied to the fact that there could be a second season. There is a tiny bit of a cliffhanger where someone is threatening the life of Yuri, and that's kind of the tail end of this season. Um, Reasonably, I excuse me, I ultimately liked the escalation of things. Here's the thing that I didn't bring up in the first half. There was a baseball mask character that I thought was really cool, but I didn't bring up what actually happened in that scene. So ultimately, it seems like there was a guy with a baseball glove throwing basically a cannon at a character, And we eventually find out that it seems that certain of these masks have certain forcible, like, things that they absolutely have to do. They have to have it to where ultimately, if it's a baseball mask, it has to follow a baseball like formula. So if the cannon, if the baseball player throws this cannon base or this ball that looks like a cannonball at this guy, and a character was to hit said ball and smack smack it right back at the pitcher and ultimately hurt him. It's like, well, just like it fit the baseball formula, and and that's just what the end result is. Um, I thought that was kind of interesting, where there was some mass characters that had to forcibly fit some kind of formulas, or like a sumo mass character had to be a sumo wrestler. Like, it was really kind of interesting. Um, Eventually, we get into this second half. We get just this character that is, I believe, is called Great Angel, where it's like you have this character that seems kind of like he's playing possum, where it seems like he's this really skinny character that nobody is gonna think twice about, and then all of a sudden he balloons into this like hulkish character with this big uh like rod, or this big um like metal stick of sorts, and he's basically just going at people with that, to ultimately have it to where Miyuko ultimately is to seemingly go through a transformation in this second half, like go through what would be quite possibly an upgrade of sorts. And so, yeah. Plus, it seems that also there is somebody's life that is ultimately going to be on the line soon. Um, and we'll talk about that in spoilers, I hope. Uh, so, really, when going into this story, a lot of things are really interesting. There are also accidents to be had, and so on and so forth. Um, I did I would ultimately say that I liked the first half of this, like the very early episodes of this, compared to where this ended up. Like, I like reasonably, I was just kind of like, I guess I could have overall just enjoyed the ride, but I just really just liked the early episodes of these, just because I like the mystery of it all. And then after you get kind of the consensus of what this whole thing is, what this whole setup is, then you just can enjoy the visuals along the way. And then I think eventually you just get to the point of just like, okay, that point has kind of ran its course, and then ultimately you're just gonna just tolerate whatever happens at the end, kind of thing. Not saying that this ending was bad, and not saying that there weren't interesting visuals going on towards the end here. Like, ultimately, we have it to where we have one character who was burying his head into some girl's chest in some portion of this here. But anyways, so interesting things going on, but let's get into the interesting parts of spoilers. So let's go into that double five to otherwise spoil the rest of the show. Uh, I don't know. Like, when looking at this one, would I still recommend people watch this one? I don't know. I think there could reasonably be other animes that I could recommend. Uh, I'm gonna try and get through more of Gleipnir, or I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably ill pronouncing it. Um, I'm probably gonna go back into that and watch some more of that. I don't know. I kind of want to keep watching animes, because eventually one of them will probably pay out at some point. That ultimately people will really enjoy them. Um, but anyways, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this second half. So ultimately, we have it to where in this episode, and nothing is really 100% just really confirmed within the second half. It was like, it seems like there was so much story that was just to be left unresolved within this first season. Like there was so much stuff where it was like, oh hey, yeah, like it seems like Sniper Mask might be somehow connected to Yuri's brother, but that never gets resolved. Hey, it might be that Mayuko eventually like keeps evolving from being more than just having the abilities of a mask to maybe evolving into something even more, and then ultimately she seems to be doing really really good against the Great Angel and so on and so forth. But that ultimately just kind of like we have it to where like it seems bizarrely that everybody's just bizarrely getting just special powers at this point. It seems like everybody's all of a sudden like becoming like they've leveled up like every single character at some point. So I'm probably not going to break this second half down in the most perfect way possible, just because I think there's a lot of like muddled things going on within these last episodes. So I apologize, Voltme. I'm not getting everything utterly correct and straight and everywhere and whichever wise. So justifiably, we ultimately have it in the very beginning of this where it seems that we find out that seemingly Sniper Mask days are quite possibly numbered. That eventually we have it to where it seems that his mask is going to tell him to jump off a cliff, so to speak, fairly soon. So, because we ultimately have it to where his mask is defective, and it seems that they have finally learned that his mask is defective, and so ultimately it seems that he is tempted to go and do himself in, or otherwise be comatizing himself. So we end up having it to where reasonably that the girls are to go and connect hands with girls. I mean, Kuon and Mayuko end up connecting themselves to Sniper Mask to seemingly go into his mind. To otherwise, I guess, prevent this whole connection thing or prevent this whole death thing and stuff along those lines. So we eventually have it to where bizarrely they connect into Sniper Mask's mind, and so ultimately we end up finding it that seemingly that Mayuko's mask spirit is going to appear to ultimately seemingly give her an upgrade of sorts that she's going to use after she leaves Sniper Mask's mind. And ultimately, it seems that they are going and talking to the younger variation of Sniper Mask. And so ultimately, they go and they talk to the younger Sniper Mask for reasons, story, whichever one have you. I guess to prevent him from otherwise doing himself in. And so ultimately, we end up having them being pulled from that reality. And we eventually have it to where Yuri is ending up borrowing the cell phones of both Kuon and Mayuko to, I guess, eventually, because she needs to call some folks. She needs to call some people. And eventually she talks to Sniper Mask, and ultimately Sniper Mask gives her the, I think, wallet that ultimately he had on him. And so eventually we have it to where Yuri ends up looking at actually Sniper Mask's face, legitimate face, because he takes his mask off, and because he goes and drinks some tea, and Yuri looks at his legitimate face and says like, yeah, like you don't look familiar to me. Maybe somehow you're connected somehow to my brother, because if anything, my brother had worn that same exact hat that you're wearing and said that supposedly he had worn that hat because it's the hat of his idol, somebody that he worshipped of sorts. Funny enough, we don't actually have her brother wearing that hat in this world, I guess. I could probably lost it somehow. So we end up having it so we supposedly have it to where seemingly bizarrely in Kuan and Sniper Masks, like it seems like they get mind connected at some point, and bizarrely they are fantasizing about one another getting married. Why? I don't know. But ultimately, we have it to where I think when the mind melding of Kuan, Mayuko, and Sniper Mask is going on, we ultimately have it to where Yuri ends up hearing some girl screaming and utter into needing help. So Yuri, seemingly after being one with God, ultimately goes and tries to save this girl from being killed, but ultimately Yuri is a little bit too late. We find out seemingly that this girl had had her head chopped off, and so Yuri ends up going and fighting off seemingly multiple masked men that are otherwise doing this bizarre juggling maneuver where they're kind of like they're rotating their heads into this one shield, and so eventually they separate. And we now have it to where Yuri is putting together like the Neo Matrix like choreographed fight scene from the end of Matrix where Neo isn't the one, but ultimately he needs to be. So we have it to where like Neo would go like when in that big huge building, the metal detector goes off and he shows, hey, yeah, I got like 50 guns on me, and so he has to go and like kill everybody in that office, like that whole scene. Like this is like frame by frame, very familiar with Yuri fighting all these guys off with guns. I'm like, why does she even have a sword or any kind of knives or whatever? Because she uses these guns like all the time. Like ultimately, we eventually find out that seemingly these guns jam normally, but eventually we have it to where there seems to be some mechanic guy that could otherwise help her out. Um, because we find out that old man from earlier who had lost all of his guys was evidently a mechanic that knew stuff about guns and stuff like that. We ultimately have it to where this old man ultimately has a young kid with him, and we ultimately find out that this kid is connected to the purple-haired king of the masked people. And so I was like, okay, interesting. What a connection! What a small world. So, going on into here, we ultimately seemingly have it to where we find out that Mamuro Aikawa, hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ultimately, we find out seemingly that that guy was working with uh, Yuri's brother, but then we find out instead he's actually working with the villain side. He's working with the masked marauders, and eventually we have it to where seemingly we get to the point to where ultimately we find out that Yuri is actually this guy's brother, because ultimately we end up having it to where a Ikawa ultimately goes and calls him and ultimately says like, hey, yeah, this Yuri girl, like, yeah, like, I hope I'm gonna kill her soon. And we ultimately have it to where like Yuri's brother is treating it like it's nothing and is like, yeah, I really want to go after this girl kind of thing. And so ultimately we have it to where Yuri's brother ultimately says like, you're never gonna get one finger on her kind of thing, like kind of like basically saying that she's gonna outbeat you and out whatever you. And so we end up having a Kawa ultimately saying like, "Oh, so she is your brother? Good." Basically saying that they're going to use one another against one another, because eventually we have it to where uh, Yuri's brother is kind of used as bait to sucker Yuri and all the people in to go against these masked individuals. We ultimately seemingly have it to where ultimately Yuri's brother is kind of taken and ultimately to be held hostage to ultimately be put in as bait. So we end up having it to where they are going to now all form a plan. We ultimately have it to Mayuko ultimately is to get her new download of information, and her masked individual that is coming to her is now going to be erased shortly thereafter. Mayuko gets this new download of information. So we go on. So we seemingly end up having it to where the Great Angel ends up. We have this big fight out. We have big fight out. Things happening. War is going on. All kinds of cool stuff. Everybody's battling out because ultimately we have it to where they had the sniper mask and everybody had a plan that that they were going to try and kill the girl with the purple hair, the leader, first. But ultimately had the big chest. Ultimately, there's a master plan to take her out first because it seems like she was the leader of everybody, and or what they were to assume was the leader of everybody. Because ultimately, we have certain characters that are closer to God that are kind of controlling people as well. So we end up having it to ultimately Sniper is to go and uh, shoot seemingly this masked individual, and the kid ultimately ends up muttering that's, "Oh my god, that's my mother." And so we end up having it to where Sniper Mask ends up missing on purpose because he didn't realize this information, and so ultimately it ends up clipping this girl's hair to ultimately have this girl start releasing all these smoke bombs out one by one by one. So ultimately their master plan was all for nothing. And so we end up having everybody going into action for realsies, not for plays. So we end up having it to where there is a bizarrish, like there's a swimmer mask where ultimately this is the bizarrest thing. So we end up having at some point that Yuri is taking on this swimmer mask, and so this swimmer mask is like basically has nothing but this like thong on basically. It doesn't even look like a speedo, like it just looks like this slimmiest swimsuit, and he has like goggles that he can put on his head. And so we end up having it to where this guy is on building, but bizarrely, this swimmer mask can go seemingly and dive into said wall or into said concrete and reappear out of anywhere. So we eventually have it to where Yuri takes this thing down, but I was just godsmacked by this visual. It was weird. We ultimately have it to where the Great Angel seems to be very slim at first, but then eventually turns into this muscle man with this big iron like rod of sorts. We have it to where Mayuko ends up trying and taking this thing down desperately, repetitiously with these duo knives, just kind of just flinging with their like her knives, like she can just outspeed this character. But the Great Angel is just kind of like just matching match for match. Uh, but eventually we have it to where ultimately everybody is going to try and get through this and try to just beat everybody. Because ultimately, that is the real key here, is to ultimately have it to where seemingly everyone is going to get out of this alive. Seemingly. So we end up having it to where ultimately, uh, again, the Sniper Mask and Quran end up going to their weird fantasy zone of bizarrish marriage, which doesn't make any sense to me. We ultimately have it to where seemingly Yuri's end up killing what is ever left of any of these masks. Uh, it seems that eventually that Mayuko eventually takes down the Great Angel, uh, and eventually it seems that everything is going well or on the upside of the heroes, and eventually we have it to where seemingly that uh, Ikawa is really the last real villain. We seemingly have it to where the purple haired girl realizes that her son is on the field, and she just goes off to run off to her son, and ultimately we have it to where like that personality kind of just gets changed because forcibly it's like, oh well, like, hey, I gotta go after my son. So reasonably there is quite possibly a lot to just kind of finish up on this one, but all that's really left is just this great battle that goes on with the Great Angel, and that's about it. Like reasonably everything else is just kind of like, okay, well, like, okay, so and so people are killing this or killing this mask, so and so person's killing this mask, and reasonably that's about it. We end up having it to where it seems like there's a lot of cliffhangers to ultimately see what happens with Yuri and her brother, and because ultimately they don't actually see one another towards the tail end of this. There's still like the ultimate cliffhanger of, will Yuri get her brother back? Who knows? We'll find out towards the end of this season or towards the next season. Like it seems like there is a lot of like still like things unresolved. If they kill all the masks, will they be able to freely just be able to get to the helicopter and leave? Will that be a possibility? But other than that, yeah, it's just a big fight out with recently Mayuko and Great Angel, and that's pretty much sums it up within these episodes. Uh, so yeah, just reasonably really gotten through just kind of quickly summarizing these last couple episodes, and so yeah. Um, if you guys finish the rest of this season, let me know. But other than that, I think I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.